Thanks, Tim. Yes, I've been a coffee drinking mate of Derrick for a few years, and we talked about matters medical from time to time, but when he let it slip that he used to run the TGA, well, what could I say? What an opportunity for an interesting speaker. So the rest is history. Thank you.
I don't think Derrick ran all of the TGA, did you?
Yes, I did for a
Yes,
period
you
of
did.
time.
Okay. Thank you. Stand corrected. Okay, without further ado, can I introduce our speaker, Derrick Beech? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to stay seated because I have difficulty standing up for prolonged periods of time. Anyway, I just want to say that my career has evolved as medical technology has evolved, and so I will take you through a little bit of that, but also it's not an area where there are a lot of scams because it's a regulated industry, and TGA, if there is a scam out there, they'll jump on it. So we are quite regulated in Australia, possibly more so than in America or Europe. Anyway, and I have my esteemed colleague over here who can contribute if as necessary. Okay, so I'll start the first slide. Okay, so what is a medical device? Well, it's anything that's used for medical purposes. It's not a medicine, basically. It's that simple. Everything that, like I have hearing aids or spectacles or false teeth, everything that's used for medical purposes is not a medicine. But what's interesting is that the first medical devices were used in dentistry. You go back to Egyptian times, and the Egyptians used to try and wire, when they had lost a tooth, they'd find a tooth from a dead body or something and wire it onto the adjacent teeth with gold wire. So it was the first area where medical devices were used because it's accessible and it often gives problems. But in Australia, about the wartime, the Second World War, there were virtually no medical devices. There were hardly anything other than dental products. And during the wartime, all our dental products were imported into Australia. So the government decided to ensure that the quality of these dental materials had to be ensured because of the difficulty in supply. So they created an organisation called the Commonwealth Bureau of Dental Standards, which became the Australian Dental Standards Laboratory, ADSL. And I came to Australia from a position as a lecturer in dental materials at Manchester University to run this organisation, which did research and tested dental materials. And that's all it did, basically. That's all it was set up to do. But in the meantime, since World War II, the whole area of medical devices has developed greatly, and a lot of it has evolved from dentistry. I mean, for example, joint replacements were one of the first implants, and that was developed at Manchester University by an orthopedic surgeon called John Charlton, who had an idea of having a metal hip and to replace a diseased hip, but he didn't know how to fix it into the bone. So he went to my predecessor at the dental school and said, how can I glue this into the bone? And my predecessor said, well, why don't you use acrylic? That's the same stuff used for dentures. And you can make it into a paste, and you ram it into the bone with the replacement joint, and it sets and it locks it into place. So the two between them developed the first hip replacement, and that's evolved now to knees and shoulders and all sorts of orthopedic implants. But since then, also since the dental materials also has evolved now into biomaterials, so materials used in the whole of the body. Some of them in the soft tissues, which we'll talk about later, and then there's also the knowledge and ability to make implants more tissue compatible has happened since the war, and also the ability to use devices from animals. Ian and I attend a discussion group where one of the people at the discussion group has a pig valve and the other one has a cow valve in his and they function quite well, though they don't last forever, of course. And then there's also the improvement in electronics and the huge demand these days for products which can improve aesthetics. People become very fixed on improving their appearance using medical devices. Also, there's been the evolution of IVDs, in vitro diagnostics, tests for all sorts of diseases and complaints. So so when I got to the role of the Dental Standards Laboratory, it seemed to me that we needed to do more than just dentistry. So we started to do other things in anticipation of this evolution. And but regulation of medical devices didn't start till about 1985. Before 1985, you could sell a heart valve or a pacemaker on the street corner. There was more regulation of a toaster or a kettle, because the toasters and kettles had to go through the electrical authority to be certified as safe. But there was nothing at all that did any checks on medical devices prior to 1985. So, and here's a couple of examples of them. The left-hand one is an intraocular lens. It's if you see the little loops on either side there, they're called the haptics, and that's one of the most successful procedures you can have today. It's about 99.9% effective in that they take the cataract lens out and slide that into the pocket where the old lens was. But again, that little bit, the actual lens, is made out of polymethyl methacrylate, acrylic. The same stuff is used for false teeth. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of a hip prosthesis. And the original hip prosthesis had a metal femoral component and a metal cup, but unfortunately that used to produce metal filings that cause irritation. So on the left-hand side, the left-hand corner, you can see now that the acetabular cup that has a polyethylene cup inside it, which reduces the friction and enables the hip prosthesis to last a lot longer. Oh, by the way, please, if you have anything you particularly want to raise as I'm talking, please interrupt me. I don't want this to be formal. I want it to be interactive. So, as I said, the Dental Standards Authority started testing condoms, and because of AIDS coming in, and suddenly condoms became not just a contraceptive, but it became a life-saving device. And condoms, before testing, had holes in them, and that was extremely dangerous in the AIDS era. Also, we started testing in the Dental Standards Laboratory insulin syringes and drug infusion pumps because they were widely used and needed to be ensured that they were of good quality. But in 1984, I initiated medical device regulation, and it just so happened that I put together a plan after going around the world and looking at systems around the world, and I came back with a plan. And just at that time, the Bjork-Shirley heart valve was failed, that this is a heart valve that is put in an artificial heart valve, and occasionally the arm, one of the arms broke off, and the whole thing failed, and the person died. So a few people died from this poorly welded heart valve. Also, at the same time, B. Braun, a well-known German manufacturer, was harvesting dura mater. That's the covering of the brain. There's a film over there's a membrane over the brain, and they were harvesting dura mater from people, dead people in the street. And then it turned out that some of them had mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt disease. And so several people in Australia and even in New Zealand died from this implant of dura mater. And so I thought, this is the time to do something. So I tipped ABC Four Corners that there was a problem here, and they did a program on it. And they came to talk to the guy whose wife had died of the heart valve failure by her grave, and said something, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. Then they came and interviewed me in my lab, and then they went to see the Minister Blewett and said, Blewett, Mr. what are you going to do about it? He said, I've decided to regulate medical devices. And I slipped him the plan the day before. So we started to get resources for it, and but we could only do a few categories, 6 originally. Like there was heart valves, pacemakers, drug infusion pumps, intraocular lenses, and intraocular viscoelastic fluids. So, and around that time, the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods was created. Now, if you're on this register, it means you are able to import and supply in Australia. So that's the linchpin of the Australian regulatory system. And in the Therapeutic Goods Act of 1989, the regulation of medical devices was all formalised, and that's when TGA was created. And I was one of the 4 creators of it. So here's a heart valve. You can see it's a similar design to the one at Bjork-Charlie heart valve, and that the ball bounced up and down in that framework, and the heart valve was sutured in place to replace the person's valve by that ring there, and you can see the ball will be bouncing up and down, and it's not quite the same design, but very similar. And one of those arms broke off, so because it wasn't adequately welded. So now we have medical device regulation here. And medical devices are risk. I'll just give you some background about how it all works. They are classified according to risk, high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And manufacturers are required to have a quality system. They must comply with standards, and the devices must be tested in the lab and in clinically. So all that has to be put together to get registration here in Australia. But the first country to regulate medical devices was the FDA in 1976, and they still have their own weird system, which is like the reason they still use feet and inches and gallons and all that sort of thing. So they decided in 1976 that everything that goes on the market must be similar, must be equivalent to something pre-1976, and that's how they judge it. It's called substantial equivalence. And they're still doing that today, even though the equivalence to devices today, going all the way back to '76, it's got all the way from 1976. But anyway, the other system that developed was in the European Union was the CE mark in 1993, and the Europeans did something quite radical in allowing private organisations called notified bodies to do the approval. So and that's still the case today. And an Australian regulatory system now is based upon the European system, though we don't have notified bodies here. It's all TGA. International, and then subsequent to that, there's been an international harmonisation, and the Global Harmonisation Task Force has been has been active in trying to harmonise regulations around the world, and we have adopted the global system in 2002, which but still it's important to realise that medical devices are not like medicines. Medicines are a fixed chemical entity, whereas medical devices evolve, like cars or or televisions. So always as they evolve, medical devices will fail. There's no such thing as a total there's no certainty that as they evolve something will happen that undesirable might happen. Oh, wrong way. So in my job as a medical device regulator, I always used to say that if everybody thinks I'm doing a bad job, then I was doing okay, because you can't bias yourself to any particular party. The consumers are always complaining that more needs to be done, and and the government should be checking more things. The medical profession thinks that they have their own ideas about that, and I'll come to that later, but they think they know a lot, and so I set up a consultative committee with medical professionals to make sure they were involved. The industry was very grumpy when I started doing it, and even though it was smoothly introduced, and after I left the TGA, I became a consultant, and I tried to join the Medical Industry Association, and they wouldn't let me join, because they still thought I was a bad person for introducing a regulation. And then the government always wants to do more, wants to save money, and wanted to do more with less. So, but the media has a significant role too, and they tend to come and want simple and sensational stories. And I certainly have been done over by the media. That was one of the reasons why I left the TGA. I'll mention it. I'll mention it when I talk about breast implants later. But and then there's the role of class actions and courts. More and more, that the people when there's a significant problem, the courts and the class actions are becoming involved, and again, I'll talk about this specifically. A recent example was the vaginal mesh, which I'll discuss specifically later on. I was involved in that. But a lot of these issues that arise in the community of medical devices can be sort of trends, you know. A few of us may remember RSI was a big issue, you know, and everybody was getting it. But it's not talked about now, but it's still, these things rise in the media and become a big issue, and then something else float, and that happens with medical devices too, issues. So, but in Australia we have very little industry now, unfortunately. We used to make things like syringes and needles and condoms in Australia, but we don't anymore. We import everything. We import about 90 to 95% of the medical devices in Australia are imported. We have a couple of success stories. ResMed, which does the CPAP device, the continuous positive airway pressure device, which was invented here in Sydney, and Cochlear, which the cochlear implant, which is again invented here in Sydney. Oh, well, it was invented in Melbourne, but commercialised here in Sydney. But and that both of those companies are doing very well. So here's the area where we can chew it over a bit. You know, joint replacements, from the original basic thing that Charlie did it in Manchester. There are all sorts of companies trying to make them better, and but some of them work better than others. And how do you find out which works better than the other? So what's been done is registries have been set up where surgeons register the implant with a with a central organisation, and then report it to that organisation how the implants progress. So in a way that's how you can't necessarily know how a device is going to perform until it's been in people for a while. So that's post-market review. So by having these device registries is enable the devices to become more more evolved, and be able to work out which ones are better than others. But one of the things that happened to me while I was in TGA was AIDS came along, and it was, as I said, condoms were certainly very important, and so we started testing them. One test is you blow them up until they see how much they expand, till they explode, to test the elasticity. That always is a great interest to the media. It's very visual, but I remember one company, for example, they failed our testing, and their company was called Safe and Sure, the condom, and I was on the TV and I said, well, they're not so safe and they're not so sure. And the guy rang me up afterwards, he said, you ruined my business. But again, another thing that wasn't regulated prior to AIDS was disinfectants. And it turned out that a lot of disinfectants were ineffective. So we had to set standards for disinfectants. And there was a well-known story here of a guy, a dentist here in Sydney, back in the early 90s, and he didn't sterilise, he didn't use a disinfectant, it was ineffective, and several of his customers, his patients, got AIDS through his instruments not being properly disinfected. So again, we had to regulate and set standards and test disinfectants. I did mention about breast implants. That again blew up in the early 90s, and because the women were complaining that they were leaking, and so they had silicone inside them, which was supposed to be a gel. Now, in fact, some of the manufacturers were not making that contents of the breast implant as a gel. There was too much liquid in it, and the liquid was leaking out and getting around their bodies and into their brains. So I had all these distressed women with scarred chests coming to see me, and I came to a meeting here, and they were all showing me their scars. And but the medical profession said, "Oh, they're just stupid, neurotic women." You know, they didn't. They thought it was. They were not at all empathetic with these women. Anyway, it just so happens that breast implants were not regulated as medical devices. They were considered to be for cosmetic purposes. So I had to change the definition of a medical device, to include breast implants, which mean I added into the definition of a medical device that it must, anything that changes the anatomy or physiology of a person is a medical device. So it became regulated, and then I banned all breast implants. I said, you can't sell them anymore until you come and see us and provide evidence that they are safe and effective. And only saline implants were available for a while. They've gradually come back again now, and hopefully they've improved their technology. But I got done over by Channel 9. I just had a little incident. They came to see me in my office, and they set up a camera, and they interviewed me for about 2.5 hours, and I was sort of flagging, and then we'd produced it, and then they asked me a question, and I can't remember what it was now, and I answered, and they said, but you said this in your booklet, and I went, oh. And on Channel 9, on the Sunday morning program, that's all they showed me doing, going, oh. And so I was done over by the Channel 9. But I had such a controversy there with these breast implants. I had to form a special committee of experts who would provide support to me because I was being so attacked from all quarters by the whole issue. Anyway, the other thing that cropped up again in there was IUDs, intrauterine contraceptive devices. It turned out there was a type of IUD which had they have strings on them which should come out of the uterus, and this one had a woven string, and the bacteria went up the string into the uterus, and so it turned out again that IUDs weren't regulated properly. So I said, okay, no more IUDs except two, one I think it was. Yes.
What went up the string?
Bacteria
Oh.
from the vagina into the uterus, and most of them should just have a solid thread, not a woven thread. And so I banned IUDs again. Said you've got to go out and prove that they're safe, and then you can come back and sell them. And then around that same time, his daughter died of toxic shock. I remember he came from Cairns, and he was a new media lobbyist. And tampons are not medical devices, really. They don't treat, alleviate, or mitigate disease, ailment, or injury. They're not for medical purposes. They're for hygiene purposes. But he lobbied so hard, writing to the minister and saying something needs to be done to stop them being, make sure that nobody else has toxic shock. So put warnings saying, if you wear this tampon, you risk death. So I resisted it for a while, but in the end we had to do something. We had to involve ourselves in putting warnings on the packet. And there was another company I was involved in when I left the TGA called Skeptics, and again they had invented a contraceptive where you insert into the fallopian tube a collection of wires which stimulate occlusion of the fallopian tubes, and but they turn out to cause women all sorts of problems. So you're probably getting a theme now that there's a lot of these issues tend to be for women, and this is a more recent one, the surgical mesh, where it was used, where there was a class action because of its use in the vagina to support uterus prolapse, and I happen to be a witness for the people, Shine lawyers, and I looked at the regulatory files of Johnson & Johnson, and they were rubbish. But it turned out that again the class action, the plaintiffs in this won the case. But it's an example again of surgical mesh being inappropriately used. I have surgical mesh in me. Now I have 2 hernias, and it's great stuff. A lot of the issues about medical devices can often be due to inappropriate use. That they just they didn't work in that situation, but in many other soft tissue support situations it does work. And then more recently, again post TGA as a consultant, COVID of course arrived, and face masks suddenly became not just things that people use in operating theatres, but life-saving things again. And again, about more than 1,000 companies tried to supply face masks in Australia, and standards were implemented, and a lot of them started to fail. And so again, it's a bit of a rerun of the AIDS epidemic, whereas things that certainly that were just not particularly important have become really important. And then rats tests again. There was more than 1,000 manufacturers wanting to supply rats tests in Australia, and it just got so bogged down. I think most of them never got through because there was such a big waiting list.
I have a question.
Hmm?
Regarding the rats test, I remember when the second variant came along, I was trying to find out if the old rats tests were good for the next variant. And going online and looking at I saw the list of so many manufacturers, and some manufacturers were selling under 3 different names, and
Yeah.
it was pretty boggling. I mean, how is it that why are they selling under so many different names and all this sort of thing?
Could you repeat the
It's
question?
crazy.
The question?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So, well, yes, I mean, that's what happens when medical devices are supplied. The local the people will brand them with their own brand, although they come from the same source, probably in China. Yes,
Yeah.
but it certainly was quite a torrent of face masks which overwhelmed TGA basically. Anyway, so, and the last one that I think is worth noting is there's been a huge amount of activity in the beauty industry, and we've become so affluent now that everybody, a lot of, particularly women, but more men too, want to go and get treated, make themselves look younger, and there are devices that will tighten skin and remove fat. So I think this was mentioned somewhere on the Skeptics website, saying, is these devices which sculpt the body scams? Well, they're not. There are the devices that remove fat are radio frequency which heats subdermally, or cryotherapy which freezes subdermally, or ultrasound, which again heats subdermally, and it destroys the fat cells and causes the skin to scar internally and shrink. So they do work, and they're very widely available now. My business as a consultant changed into about more than 50% beauty stuff because of the sheer demand of everybody wanting to import and sell them and use them. And then there is again quite a bit of talk these days about dermal injection, about dermal fillers, and there's a substance called hyaluronic acid which is used in these dermal fillers, which is a natural occurring substance in the body, but in this case they're made by bacterial fermentation. So there's a lot going on in the beauty industry, and then some of it, well, most of it is regulated by TGA. So finally, I don't know where we're up to. Yes, it's about time. So nowadays, TGA registration on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods is mostly based upon overseas registrations. We just don't have the resources here to do it. When I had started medical device regulation, I had 40 staff. I went over to America, and the medical device regulators in America had 1,500. And we have the same range of products here as they have there. So, and so the more we can harmonise overseas and use overseas experience, the more effective we can be here. But in the end, it comes down to risk-benefit. The assessment always is does the benefit exceed the risk? I just remember again when I was at TGA, my chief medical officer came to me and said, this company wants to supply hyaluronic acid to inject into joints as a lubricant for joints, but the evidence for it, how well it worked wasn't sufficient to justify the risk of putting a needle in your knee, and he wanted to reject it, so we did. But in Japan, every orthopedic surgeon does it. It's big. It's a big thing in Japan, but the orthopedic surgeons here in Australia don't want to do it. Won't do it because it doesn't work very well. So again, but in New Zealand right now, they don't regulate medical devices. They have a register. They have a system called WAND, Web Assisted Notification of Devices, and you can you just tell them what the devices you're supplying, and that's it. They rely, hopefully, on other countries like America and Europe and Japan and doing it so that because I think they have about 15 people in New Zealand in a company organisation called MedSafe. So as I said before, increase the post-market performance of medical devices is becoming more important. You can't really tell how well a device will perform unless it's out in the marketplace and its performance is monitored in the marketplace. So there's a greater emphasis on following up, such as these registries, to see how things perform. But again, a lot of devices like the mesh depend on appropriate use, and sometimes you push a device to do something that it's not really suited to do, then you'll have a problem. But the TGA is very active here, so there's very little in the way of scams, and if there is, the TGA will get onto it. And the TGA have recently, the last few years, got the ability to issue fines. Until about 4 years ago, the TGA had no mechanism of punishment other than to take the perpetrator to court, and that was too much of a problem, too difficult to do. So finally, I just wanted to, my particular area is dentistry. That's where I started in the dental school at Manchester University, and my particular area of interest is adhesion, sticking things to teeth, and that's developed very much these days. So, and that stops sticking things to teeth will stop leakage and stop decay going into your tooth. And now we have implants. Titanium now is bone compatible. You can have a dental implant made out of titanium and the bone will bond to it, which again is only something that's come about in the last 10 to 15 years. And in the longer term, what's happening now is the impact of artificial intelligence is going to have a big impact on medical devices, in that it'll be able to more efficiently maybe determine X-rays of where there is breast cancer. There's a lot of scope for AI to improve the performance of medical devices. Also, SAMD is software as a medical device. Again, there's much more use now of software in its own right, used as a medical device for helping, well, for example, helping clinicians to make decisions about treatments. And again, there's been a bit of publicity recently about an artificial heart developed by a guy in Brisbane. Well, the sort of device he's developed will only be a short-term bridge to an implant. But we had a company in Australia called Ventricor, which was here for 20 years and developed basically the same type of device that this guy did in Brisbane. But unfortunately, ultimately ran out of money. But hopefully in the future, there will be more development of artificial organs. I mean, already it's a standard procedure for diabetics to have their blood cleaned. Kidney failure, have their blood cleaned. And so I think there's a lot of potential in the future for this to develop. And with that, I think I've finished my talk.
Thank you very much. That's great. I will look into that website. You said you mentioned Skeptics saying a scam, but it wasn't a scam. I'll look into
Yeah,
that.
it's Tim Harding.
All right, okay. I'll check on Tim.
He's very active in it.
Okay.
He was saying body sculpting. Is it a scam? He was on Facebook saying that.
Was it? Okay.
That's Skeptics in Australia.
Skeptics in Australia. Okay,
Yes.
that's not our site.
Not our side.
No, it's not. No,
Yeah,
that's right.
That's okay.
Come away from the speaker, Tim.
Thank you, I will. We empathise with you about your problems with the media. I think we face that quite a lot, knowing, putting in a lot of effort and suddenly find what's used is actually not quite the way you wanted it to go. Can I ask a question about medical devices? Is electrical devices to protect you against electromagnetic frequencies? I'm talking about plug-in or stick-on devices, especially what's being used for mobile phones and things like that. Do they come under the TGA?
Well, medical devices that have to pass a test. There are standards for electromedical safety, and there are tests which ensure that your medical device, you have to get it registered. You have to show that it's not adversely affected by electromagnetic radiation.
But these are devices, the things we've seen around actually that the Skeptics get involved with, and then Choice gets involved with, of products that are supposed to protect you against electromagnetic, like little dots you stick on your mobile phone. They don't work.
Oh,
But I mean, that's not your area. That wouldn't be the TGA area.
Derrick, they're probably PPE, personal protective equipment,
uh,
because they're not providing a therapeutic use, they're actually protecting you from something.
Right.
Allegedly.
We're saying it's a PPE, it's a personal protection.
I'm suggesting it might be,
Yeah, that's the question, because there's a difference between harm and efficacy.
But these devices aren't providing a therapeutic use, are they?
No, they're not providing a therapeutic
I
use.
don't
Yeah.
think they would meet the definition of a medical device.
Okay. I'm trying to think who they come under actually. They just look like Consumer Affairs.
Consumer affairs.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hang on.
I'm going to go.
When I was studying engineering, we had a lecturer in materials science who had a pronounced limp and something wrong with his hip. He refused to have a hip replacement because he believed that, being an expert in materials science, that whatever was put in, if it contained metal, it would rust. Do you hear or do you know of any corrosion problems with the existing implants?
they used to be, there are stainless steel and they can be titanium. Neither of those rust in the body. There's not been an issue with rusting in the body, but in the case of hip replacements, for example, if it's metal on metal, then particles of metal are rubbed off and accumulate in the joint and in the muscle and can cause a lot of inflammation. But it's not too hard to select metals that don't rust in the body. Though it is but certainly the body is a very aggressive environment.
Questions? Anyone else? One here.
I see you're wearing a medical device. I hope it works for you. I hope it's been. TJ should have tested it.
So you have the software as a medical device. Now, I work with a lot of software, and a lot of software in the world is proprietary, and it's for the use of, it's sold and it's traded, and it's not open source, so it's not free software. So under what scope does the TGA regulate software? Do you have to hire software engineers to manage that aspect? And do you think the proprietary nature is something in the scope of the TGA?
Sorry, say that again. TGA do regulate software if it has an impact on a medical procedure, a medical technology. So devices which have medical software in them are subject. The software is considered in the registration of a medical device.
Yes, but it's generally also proprietary in that can limit its efficacy or its safety if people can't cross-examine that software to make sure it's working correctly.
Yes, well, medical devices are usually proprietary, so basically the TGA has to rely on, as is the case in drug regulation, on information provided by the manufacturer, and I'm not quite sure of your point about proprietary, though. I mean, software is proprietary as much as medical devices are proprietary.
Okay, question over here.
Going back a way, dental practice was to use mercury and amalgams.
Yes.
Did that come under your jurisdiction?
Sure, yes, yes.
And at what point was it taboo?
Well, I actually was a member of the dental health NHMRC Dental Health Committee for 10 years. And I wrote a position paper on dental amalgam when I was in that position. And dental amalgam itself is not dangerous. It's the mercury is bound up is not released in a dental amalgam. The people that were at risk of dental amalgam are the dentists, because when they're drilling it or mixing it, and the vapor, they can inhale the vapor, but in fact there's very little evidence that anybody's been harmed. I'm not aware of any evidence there's been any harm from mercury in the amalgams.
However, there are people, thank you, I know lots of people who pay great amounts of money and dentists who get rich through removing amalgam.
Well, that's not ethical. If a dentist, it's not. That's one of the things I made the point of in my statement from HMRC. If it is more harmful to the patient to remove the amalgams just because of concerns about mercury, it's more harmful to the patient than leaving them in. Much more so, much more damage caused to the teeth, and also. The polymer ones that are used now, the particulate filled polymers, are not as durable in the occlusal teeth at the back. They don't withstand that as well as amalgams used to.
I have a question related to registrations and incentives or penalties or whatever. I mean, what if you're seeing the same doctor, they know what you put in, if they knew what they put in, but say you go on and you see different, and you have a problem later, are there any incentives for them to report things to the registration, or how does that work?
Yes, well, that's a good question. There's been quite a lot of discussion, and I think this TGA is moving in making reporting by medical practitioners, adverse event reporting, compulsory. At the moment it is voluntary, but and quite a lot is reported, particularly through institutions like hospitals, and the manufacturers are obliged to report to the TGA, legally required to report any adverse events to TGA that they become aware of. So it's not perfect, but it works.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Can you tell us about the CRP, the Complaints Resolution Panel?
Oh.
Is that part of the TGA?
Well, the Complaints Resolution Panel was based here in Sydney, and it wasn't part of the TGA. It had no legal standing, no legal teeth. I think it was an industry-based group, and they looked at problems, and if they thought there was a problem that needed action, they then had to ask the TGA to do something about it, and then the TGA looked at it and decided whether it will or whether it won't do it. But a few years ago now, probably about 4 years ago, the CRP was abolished. and TGA have taken the regulation of advertising completely in-house and produced new advertising regulations.
Can I ask two questions? Who funds the TGA? And
The
other
government,
resources
the government funds the TGA.
Via industry,
Pardon?
via industry fees.
The industry fees go into government. There are fees to industry which go into government revenue, so there is no direct funding of anybody at TGA by industry.
And how well resourced is the TGA?
Well, it's far less resourced than America, for example. You know, and that's why we have to rely a lot on overseas regulations, harmonisation. But when I started, I had 40 people. I think now the medical devices area has about 200, and I think the total TGA is about, well, it's probably more now. It's probably 500 or 600. So it's effective. I'll tell you what, we are more effectively regulated here because we know where the boundaries are, where it starts. In the Europe and in America, things are a lot more diffuse because of countries and states in America, and things are you can get away with things in America and to some extent in Europe that you couldn't get away with here.
The issue when you said about the CRP being stopped, and several years ago, 4 or 5, even 6 years ago,
Yeah.
there was a lot of discussion about the future of the TGA and how it should approach things. We made a submission to that, mainly regarding medicines, not necessarily devices. And medicines especially being divided into registered medicines, which is often the high risk area, prescription-based things, and the low risk area, which was just listed.
Yeah.
And with the listed, the manufacturer could just fill out a form online and say, bingo, it's listed. And they would say that they had the evidence that it worked. And though the TGA did sample runs of those to test if they did have the evidence and found that 90% didn't have any evidence.
That's right.
Our suggestion was that simply solve that problem and fix up the resourcing for the TGA. You just ask all those companies to submit their evidence. And most of them would not because they didn't have any. So suddenly the number of medicines out there would drop. They were sort of listed. And but the argument against that was that it was proprietary products
No.
that the TGA weren't allowed to look at it.
Oh no. There's no such thing as proprietary for TGA. Everything that a manufacturer has in relation to a medical product, drugs or devices, is accessible to all proprietary information. It can go to TGA. There's no barrier to that. That's clear. But the issue about submitting evidence for all these alternative medicines, you might say, is that again the TGA wouldn't have the resource to do much about it. But they do. I mean, I saw the other day on the TGA website this Caruso. You know, he sells some things for, I don't know, I forget what it was, but he evidence was sought from about the product, the claim he was making, and he didn't have it, and he got done over by it. He got fined. So it does happen.
It does happen, I know. But our suggestion was that if they had to submit the evidence, there'd be a small body of people, not necessarily TGA, but TGA approved, like a crowdsourcing thing, to actually go and assess that evidence. So the TGA wouldn't have to do it itself. And people objected to that. Oh no, our secrets are going to go out the window. But of course, in most cases, they didn't have any evidence, so they had no secrets. That went nowhere really.
Well, most of these low-level listed medicines would be relying on public, not their own information that they've got themselves, but what's available in the literature. Very few of them would be doing their own testing or trials.
At all, yes. I mean, we often see at functions of this mind, body, spirit, the New Age sort of exhibitions and things, a lot of products there where they proudly say, look, we're listed with the TGA, and that's a selling point. Even though most people don't understand the difference between listed, which is voluntary, and registered, which is sort of almost like a more regulated area.
Well, the listed products make very low-level claims like help you to relax and, you know, help you to sleep more easily, that sort of thing.
Some of them talk about cancer.
Yeah, treat cancer.
Some of them talk about treating cancer and various products like the various. We can take you there and show you.
What?
They say we can treat all sorts of things. What were some of the examples?
Here in
We have seen, over the 20 years I've been going to Mind, Body, Spirit, we have seen products that claim everything under the sun, from outright saying they can cure cancer.
Oh,
We've seen a variety of things. Not as bad as it used to be, though, I must say.
But we've been trying to get medical authorities to go and have a look at these things, because it's a minefield. There'd be a wonderful situation for finding people out there.
well, if, I tell you what, if there's a proprietary product, a listed product that claims somebody with cancer, TG will be on it very quickly.
Okay.
Oh,
No
I
promise.
can,
We will do it. Don't worry. We see it all the time.
well,
They often say it may help
It may
with
help,
curing
yeah.
cancer. The weasel.
well, I think cancer, it would be wouldn't be on.
We've got photos of the people saying exactly that, and not just cancer, but a whole range of mental health issues. You name it.
We'll follow that up.
We'll follow it up.
I'll be interested to see if you could, what you can find.
Yeah, right. Okay. How much time you got? You probably should wind it up there, actually. Would you please join with me in thanking Derrick Beech? I thought it was a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.